And then, as governor of New Mexico, in keeping with my promise to put the issues that should be on the front burner, in keeping with my promise that issues would be first and politics would be last, in keeping with my promise that what are we spending our money on and what are we getting for our money, when I started my second term, I wanted to take a really hard look at the war on drugs in this country, and I wanted to include legalization as a potential alternative to what we were doing. Now, I came at this from the standpoint that I wanted to crack down on DWI. I wanted to crack down on drinking and driving, but guess what? The police don't have any resources to do that. Guess what? The courts, they're so clogged, they just really can't take it on, and the prisons are full. Well, half of what we spend on law enforcement, half of what we spend in the courts, and half of what we spend on the prisons is drug-related. And to what end? Well, we're arresting 1.8 million people a year in this country on drug-related crime. I always point out that's the population of New Mexico that gets arrested every single year in this country. We now have 2.3 million people locked up in this country. That is the highest incarceration rate of any country in the world. That's on a per capita basis, 2.3 million people. So, in looking at the issue, this was back in 1999, I guess I needed to start out with Holland, which had effectively decriminalized all of its drugs. And according to Holland at the time, Holland had skyrocketing drug use and they had skyrocketing crime, and it had to do with the fact that they had decriminalized drugs. Well, it turns out after a very short examination of Holland that they have 60% the drug use as that of the United States. Now that's on a per capita basis, but that's marijuana, that's hard drugs, that's kids, and that's adults. So that kind of went out the window. And Portugal, 10 years ago, decriminalized all drug use. Portugal has the same drug use as that of Holland, but it turns out over the last 10 years, Portugal has been able to document that they've had a 50% reduction in heroin use as a result of decriminalizing heroin. So going forward, the other thing that I really needed to look at the time, 1999, and it still exists today, that marijuana is a gateway drug. Well, it's not a gateway drug. It's just not. I mean, study after study after study, including a government study, says that it's not a gateway drug. Now, I've smoked marijuana, and based on my own experience, it wasn't a gateway drug, but I wanted to find out what was out there. And again, it's not. If there is a gateway aspect to marijuana, it's that the person that sells marijuana also sells other drugs. Cocaine, heroin, LSD, methamphetamine. That's the gateway aspect associated with marijuana. So if you legalize marijuana, when it comes to kids, are kids going to get exposed to not only marijuana but harder drugs? Or are kids going to be taken away from that equation because now, if under a legalized scenario, you have to go buy marijuana and produce an ID, or you'd buy it in a controlled setting? I mean, maybe there's the case that there would be less accessibility of drugs. So after examining this issue for a fairly short amount of time, I came to the conclusion that 90% of the drug problem is prohibition-related, not use-related. And that's not to discount the problems with use and abuse, but that ought to be the focus. So in 1999, I advocated the legalization of marijuana. And when I say legalize marijuana, never going to be legal for kids to smoke marijuana, buy marijuana. Never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, get behind the wheel of a car. Never going to be legal to smoke pot, become impaired, do harm to others. I said that I had smoked marijuana. I don't drink. I don't smoke marijuana, but I have drank and I have smoked marijuana. And I will tell you from my own personal experience, there's a big difference between marijuana and alcohol. And that is that marijuana is a lot safer. Citizens of Denver 5 years ago voted to decriminalize marijuana on a campaign based on marijuana being safer than alcohol. England, just a couple of days ago, came out with a study that said that alcohol is more dangerous than heroin. and they put ecstasy and marijuana pale in comparison to the effects of alcohol. For those of you that would say, well, that's just adding one more flame to the fire, why do we need anything else added to it? Well, it's happening right now. It is happening, and I've always maintained that legalizing marijuana would actually lead to less overall substance abuse because people would smoke marijuana as opposed to doing alcohol. When it comes to all other drugs, I advocate harm reduction strategies. Basically looking at the drug issue from the standpoint of reducing death, disease, crime, corruption, the things that we really care about. In a nutshell, looking at the drug problem first as a health issue rather than a criminal justice issue. I got out of office January 1 of 2003. I was term limited. I'm a firm believer in term limits. I think as a result of term limits, I think politicians do good things for taxpayers as opposed to whatever it takes to get reelected. When it came to my having a say in what was happening nationally or at a state level, you know what? I had my shot and I didn't want to have a say in what was happening nationally. I didn't think it was my role to do that.